We're less than 72 hours away from what is officially Election Day, and over 70 million people have already cast their ballots, and most of those votes will either be for the current occupant of the White House, Republican Donald Trump, or former Vice President, Democrat Joe Biden. That day will determine the next man to occupy the Oval Office, and the differences couldn't be starker. We'll look toward Election Day 2020 up next on Impact the Vote. It's down to a small amount of undecideds in a few swing states. It's their electoral votes that will lead to the magic number of 270, and that will ultimately determine who will sit in the Oval Office. We'll take a look at what Tuesday holds and what's the future for this nation, no matter who wins the White House. We'll start today with President and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Derek, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you, Ed.
Talk to me a little bit about the Get Out to Vote effort by the NAACP, something that historically has been important to the organization.
Well, I took the reins of the organization 3 years ago, and we had a very specific focus around rebuilding our civic engagement department and activities. We've invested heavily in a data-driven program identifying individuals who were registered to vote, but infrequent voters, particularly individuals who didn't vote in 2016. Then from there, we are targeting 12 specific states to make sure we increase 5 to 7% the Black voter turnout. This election will be decided based on the energies of the Black community. And so as we look for the returns, we're gonna pay a special emphasis on the level of energy the African American community engaged in and turning out the votes.
Here's what's interesting. We're starting to see states that heretofore would never have been in play in terms of being what the media likes to call purple states, being able to go either way. Sheila Jackson Lee will be on right after you, and even Texas is somewhat in play now. What are you seeing by means of just the engagement of African Americans and people of color in moving that color from red to purple?
It's been phenomenal. The level of energy, the level of activity, the level of individuals who've actually cast the votes before Election Day has been off the chart. None of us could have predicted what was taking place. And I keep saying the best way to address vote suppression, absent policy change, is to overwhelm the system with legitimate votes from the citizens of this country, particularly African Americans. We've had to endure so much to get to this point, and what I'm seeing in Houston, Texas, for example, or in Atlanta and across the country, a record level turnout in the early votes. And so if this continues, we're going to see a different dynamic in terms of the political landscape of this country.
How concerned, if at all, are you with voter suppression? I mean, the obvious example is what we saw in Georgia with Stacey Abrams for her gubernatorial run. I know that it's a watch that the NAACP has had ongoing.
Well, I'm concerned about vote suppression the same way we should be concerned about someone stealing something out of our house, out of our car, out of our pocket. Our vote is our currency, and we must collectively leverage our currency. And any time someone is trying to steal that currency, we should be concerned, while at the exact same time not be so preoccupied with that, because the way to deal with it is overwhelm the votes. Elections are won by inches, not miles. And it's our goal to increase the turnout at a level that the inches they're trying to steal this election by become de minimis, because we've overwhelmed the system. That is the only reason why a state like Texas is even being considered at play this late in the election. That is the only reason why a state like Georgia even being considered to be at play, or North Carolina. It's because we are overwhelming the systems with votes. And if anyone watching this still have time to go vote, we're saying go vote. Our lives depend on it.
We need to talk about down ballot voting. The Senate is in play, many people suggest. We talk about states drawing new redistricting lines. It is far greater than just the person who sits in the Oval Office, is it not?
This election is not about the top of the ticket. It's about the whole ticket, from the bottom of the ticket to the top, from ballot initiative to different races. District attorneys in many jurisdictions are elected by voters. There are multiple district attorney races going on this election cycle. In fact, the district attorney who refused to prosecute the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, she's on the ballot. She has a competitor. This is about everything that's on the ballot. This is about our tax dollars. Elections are about the policymakers who are going to hold the seats to preside over the spending of our tax dollars. And those of us who work every day and we see tax dollars coming out of our check, those tax dollars are coming out to fund local, state, and federal government.
Derek, finally, I'm excited to talk about this on election night, as I have through the pandemic teamed with the NAACP to bring some great town hall meetings. You have decided that we need some, if you will, authentic coverage from our community, a voice of our community, and also giving people a voice that night. Talk to us about that special NAACP election coverage that I'll be anchoring and sitting next to you for 5+ hours.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Ed. I can recall when we first opened up this discussion, it was ancillary to your book. And, I said, we need to figure out how to do some things together. And the reason why I did that, because we as a community, we're excellent at entertaining, but we're also strategists. We're also critical thinkers. But most importantly, we have a perspective that needs to be amplified to the broader spectrum of our community. And with social media platforms, this gives us an opportunity to do so, because we see our ability to host on other people's platforms to talk about a broader narrative, but we have the capacity, as demonstrated here, to define our narrative as we take in the information that's readily available. So thank you, and I look forward.
Really excited about it. Jamel Hill, Michael Eric Dyson, Mark Lamont Hill, and many others will join us that night, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, not only on the NAACP social platforms, but mine and a number of others. Derek Johnson, looking forward to it. Thanks for being with us today.
I just noticed you call all those Detroiters out first. I wonder why.
That's the way we roll, right? Thank you, Derek Johnson. Greatly appreciate it.
Take care.
There are some states that are still in play. Surprisingly, some see the Lone Star State as one of those. We're joined now by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from the 18th Congressional District in Texas. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us. Always good to see you.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you, I mentioned that Texas, by many people's accounts, is now in play. Does that surprise you? I know you've been working hard at it. Where do you sit with that?
With a great deal of enthusiasm and a lot of hard work, but people don't realize that Texas over the last decade has really changed its demographics. We are younger, we are more diverse, we have welcomed many people from around the country, and we're thinking progressively about what is best for our children, what is best for a new, changing, reimagined Texas. With that in mind, we're also people who believe in working together. And we believe Joe Biden and Kamala Harris represent a team that will unify the nation and heal the nation. We have suffered greatly from COVID-19. You may well know that one of our cities, El Paso now, is more than a hot spot. We're setting up temporary hospitals and hospitals overflowing in the ICUs. We want a presidential team that will begin with a real plan for COVID-19. And yes, with a large Latinx population, we want a presidential team that will recognize that we're a nation of laws, but we're a nation of immigrants. Let's have the right approach to all of those things.
Yeah, we should note that the mayor of El Paso is very concerned about that city as we speak. The turnout across the board, and certainly in Texas, is crucial to a Democratic victory, is it not?
Absolutely, and I live in the largest county in the state, Harris County, larger than at least 5 states. We voted 1 million people as of last Friday. Our local officials got ahead of this. We've been talking with them for years, and they plan for the expansion of our population. People are voting with enthusiasm, and what is exciting, young people are voting with a lot of enthusiasm. But they have a reason to vote, Ed. They really do. COVID-19, but social justice issues. Our state is dead last on issues dealing with education. We want a federal government that will be a partner with us, not a federal government that has forced our schools back to the classrooms with COVID-19 simply because Donald Trump and his Secretary of Education said, you're not in school, you don't get money. That's not the way to run a country.
Let me take you out of the top spot and the importance of this election down ballot, whether or not you believe the Senate can be flipped, and the importance of, state seats, particularly as we are looking at redistricting.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. We've been together with the senatorial candidate, MJ Hager, for the last couple of days. We were just on a Zoom call with elected officials and candidates from all over the state. You're absolutely right. We are really focusing on the opportunity for a new Senate, meaning that Mitch McConnell no longer becomes Mitch Obstructionist McConnell, and that we have a Democratic-led Senate. Our candidate here is working hard and is generating the enthusiasm across communities. That means from the Anglo, Latinx, African American, and many other communities, generating a sense of hope. And so we think that's important. Her numbers are under Joe Biden, but she's rising. Joe Biden we're now in a toss-up. And then the state offices, state legislature, that has an enormous impact. I'm obviously in a voting rights district. I've had to fight every 10 years to preserve this district, and we've had to fight every 10 years to not be denied the districts that Black and Latinx communities deserve because they've been written by Republicans, and we've had to go to court to preserve that. So getting a Democratic state legislature, particularly in the House, and then with a possibility in the Senate, would be enormous, and would give us an opportunity to simply be fair. You see, when Democrats are in power, we're not trying to take over and take more. What we're trying to do is to balance and to be fair and to give those individuals under voting rights the opportunity to vote for a person of their choosing.
What do you say to those who may be a little disenchanted by the partisanship on both sides? They see some dysfunction, rightfully so, in Washington in moving things beyond Mitch McConnell just stalling. What do you tell those who suggest that there needs to be less partisanship on both sides?
You know, I'd like to characterize what they may perceive as partisanship as values. We have in the Democratic Party values that are unique. We do care about making sure that our most vulnerable are protected, that Medicaid and Medicare are protected, that education belongs to all persons and at all levels, from the primary to the secondary to higher education. And it has been our committee that has, in these years of the leadership of Speaker Pelosi, led on the issue of social justice and criminal justice reform. But I also want to say to that person that their voice is their vote, and their vote is their power. And if they vote individuals in that have the same view that they have, along with these values of making sure that we have an inclusive nation, they will see work getting done. Because yes, we do cross the aisles. We do have moments of great collaboration. We did that on the early CARES Act that helped to bring billions of dollars for testing. But we didn't have a federal government, a president that was in command or cared. And so we didn't have a plan. And when we passed the last bill that was so desperately needed to keep people from being evicted or foreclosed on, or making sure that small businesses had dollars, this president sat on it, ignored it, and said it wasn't a big deal. The person who raises the question of contention just simply needs to know that part of that is not really contentiousness. It is advocacy that needs to be in place so that voices like that voter are not unheard. And so I'd ask that voter to vote. I'd ask them to look for a change, to hold us accountable, and to be able to see when people really can work together, because we really can when we focus on values. Their vote is needed, and I hope they will get out and vote.
Well, the day is almost here when the official counting can start. Sheila Jackson Lee, as always, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you and all of your viewers. This is a great show with a great message. Get out and vote and be heard and be part of the transformational government that we expect to have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another hotly contested state is my birthplace, Michigan. We're joined now by the Lieutenant Governor of that state, Garland Gilchrist. Mr. Lieutenant Governor, I appreciate you taking time. I know you are running, so let me get you up and out of there if we can. Michigan is key. The nation is looking to it. What do you see as of right now as we move toward Tuesday?
Well, first of all, Ed, thank you so much for having me on. And I'm seeing Michigan being the most bellwether of bellwether states. But what I'm proud of is the fact that more Michigan voters have voted early than ever before. We're seeing astronomical turnout in terms of early vote in the city of Detroit, where I'm speaking with you from right now. And we have a chance to make history in terms of more people voting than have ever voted in Michigan. And I think that is going to be good for Democrats all the way up and down the ticket, starting with Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris, and all the way down to the Michigan State House of Representatives. So I've seen great energy, and I'm seeing people very committed to make sure they can cast their ballots safely during this pandemic.
What's going to be different between 2016 and 2020, when many thought walking into Election Day that Michigan was going to go to Hillary Clinton?
Zero people are taking Michigan for granted. That starts all the way with Vice President Biden and Senator Kamala Harris. They've been to Michigan more than almost any other state, I think with the exception of Pennsylvania. They've been present here. Senator Harris was just here over the weekend. Vice President Biden will be back here on Saturday. Dr. Jill Biden will be here tomorrow. They're paying attention to this state, but also the organizing that's been happening. Since 2016, when Trump won this state by the slimmest margin of any state, the Michigan Democratic Party and allied organizations have been organizing in every county and every community, have done the deepest organizing they've ever done in the city of Detroit. We have made sure to knock on doors and make phone calls, and did so much of that when we had to put that activity on pause during the pandemic, we were still able to grow our movement. That is the power that will fuel this victory, and I think will set us up for progressive change in the state going forward.
How concerned are you about voter suppression? We've seen, a judge allow open carry. We should note Michigan is an open carry state, but he has okayed it to go into a polling place. There are concerns, not just in Michigan, but across the board for voter suppression. How comfortable are you at this point?
Well, that is part of the reason why I and others are advocating so strongly that Michiganders vote early. The people who want to stop people from voting, because to be very clear, Ed, the only reason you bring a gun to a polling place is to stop somebody to vote, not to enable someone to vote. But the way that we prevent them from creating that sort of image or that sort of spectacle on November 3rd is to recognize that November 3rd is not merely election day. It is the last day of the election. People in Michigan can go to vote every day before November 3rd. And we're encouraging them to do so, because if you do that, it's going to be safer, not only in terms of the pandemic, but the people who are trying to scare voters away, they're not doing it before Election Day. So if we do that, we'll be able to get around that.
I'd be remiss by not bringing up what the nation saw in this state, and that is the attempt to possibly kidnap the governor. I know that you privately have been dealing with issues of intimidation and the like, and we're seeing a sea change, if you will, politically. What do you tell people who are concerned that this is not a blip on the radar screen, but perhaps the future of politics?
Well, Ed, for Black people in this country, this has been our present for generations. So unfortunately, this is something that is shocking, but not surprising. But what I would say to them is we have an opportunity to vote out leaders who enable and inspire this kind of hatred to come out into the public for full view. This has been aided and abetted by President Donald Trump. This has been aided and abetted by elected Republican leaders in the state of Michigan. And we have an opportunity to choose a different path in our state and choose a different path in the country. And that is why I'm encouraging people to vote if they've never voted before, because when more people vote, not only do Democrats win, but the values of inclusion, diversity, and equity, they win out too. And that will snuff out these people who will instead go back to the shadows and hide their plots of racism, of prejudice, of sexism, and all the other things that are negative and against the values that are the best of America, not the worst of it.
Let me ask you finally about the Senate seat in Michigan, hotly contested. We are starting to see a separation between Gary Peters, the Democrat, and John James, the Republican. Are you comfortable in believing that Democrats will be able to keep this seat?
I believe that we will send Gary Peters back to the United States Senate, but we only do that if we work for it. This race is close. It's been close for a while. The polling has been quite stable. That just means that we need to keep up the energy, keep up the enthusiasm. I have been traveling across the state with Senator Gary Peters to let voters know that he is who I'm supporting and he's who they should support. And I believe that we have an opportunity to get a Democratic majority in the United States Senate, but that really only happens if we send Gary Peters back home. In Michigan, we're going to take care of business, and we're going to turn out, and we're going to, I believe, win this Senate seat again for the Democrats.
Mr. Lieutenant Governor, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. We should note we invited a number of Republican candidates to appear on the show. All either declined or we never heard back from their camps. When we return, our panel joins us.
The importance of the election is I want someone to be able to work better with our communities and work better with our kids, because at this time, due to the pandemic, it's a struggle for a lot of parents that are working and also at home with the children. And we need some type of system that could help with that.
I do know people that said they may not vote. My thoughts on that, though, is that they should vote. You know, it's very important that we need change in this country, not just for us as African American, but just as a country as a whole. It's time for a change. So it's very important that we vote.
Now time to turn to our panel. Joining us is civil rights activist and host of the podcast Make It Plain, Mark Thompson. Lauren Burke, journalist with NNPA, and Lenny McAllister, senior fellow with the Commonwealth Foundation. I welcome you both, or all rather, I should say. Let's talk a little bit about where we sit as we look to Tuesday. I asked this off camera. I'll start with Mark. There are people now who are beginning to believe that we are going to see, in their words, a blowout, that it'll be, as Sophia Nelson said on this program, a blue wave. How much do you buy that?
First of all, Ed, thanks for having me. No, I'm not convinced of that, very guarded about it. Although in 3 of the critical states, Biden's up by 7. But to me, 7 is not really a blowout. That's Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Not quite a blowout. So I'd be very careful to call it that. And I guess, too, I'm also very, very concerned about whatever dirty tricks the Republicans and the Supreme Court are going to play. A blowout would take us away from the Trump chaos threshold for them to be able to challenge the vote, but I'm not sure that we're there yet.
We're seeing some leanings from this court by means of some decisions that have been made along the lines, Lauren, when we talk about whether or not you're going to make it harder for those to vote. Where do you sit on what I just asked, Mark?
Well, I think there is going to be a blowout. When you see states in play, like for the Democratic Party, like Georgia and Texas, and a serious discussion about a United States senator being elected from South Carolina, although I do predict that Graham is going to win, that is, to me, a precursor to a blowout. You see Biden leading in many of the states that President Trump won in 4 years ago. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I suspect that Biden will win all 3 of those states. Ohio is in play, but Texas should not be in play. NBC should not be talking about Texas being a toss-up, 6 days before an election. And that would tell you that, and the massive turnout, the massive lines that you're seeing in places like Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama, even though I don't think the Democrats are going to win, any of the seats. Unfortunately, I think SB will lose. But anyway, I do think that there is going to be a chance for Joe Biden to get to 400 electoral votes.
So, Lenny, let me ask you. We just had Sheila Jackson Lee on. As Lauren just says, Texas is, whether you believe it's winnable in a real sense, but in play, surprisingly to many. Lenny, how do you see this? It's very clear, if you read tea leaves, that this White House is concerned in doing everything that they can do to get to 270.
Well, first of all, I don't think it should be that much of a surprise that Texas is in play. We've been talking about for a while that Georgia will eventually go blue, that Texas will eventually go blue. Let's look at the expansion of the cities such as Atlanta San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas in regards to Democratic registration there. Maybe this is the year where that finally starts to pivot. At one point in time, it was solidly blue, and then it pivoted red. I'm not shocked when you look at the demographics that this is in play, especially when you're talking about 2020 with the racial unrest, the pandemic, which is healthcare unrest, and then the economic unrest that came from the pandemic. So let's put that out there first of all. Second of all, though, if you look at certain key states that should be a blowout, number one, they underpolled 4 years ago. It should not have been close in Pennsylvania, shouldn't have gone Trump's way. Should not have been close in Michigan and Wisconsin, and should not have gone Trump's way. If you travel Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh and outside of Philadelphia, you see nothing but Trump signs. I travel this state, and those that think that Biden's really going to be up 7 to 8 points, I don't think that that's where it actually is. I think that the typical Trump voter, still there's a certain level of tacitness that's there where they don't want to admit to the American public that they're going to go into a ballot box and vote for Donald Trump. We saw that in 2016. There has to be some type of play in there, a reverse Bradley effect, if you will, that's going to be in this election as well. Now, does that mean that Trump will automatically win Pennsylvania? No. Does it mean that it's closer in Pennsylvania than what the polls may suggest? I think absolutely. Places here, Ohio, Michigan, and as we well know, that Rust Belt can make the difference.
Mark, give me a sense of what you just saw there, the silent Trump vote, which surely stymied pollsters in 16. And it's just sheer math. I mean, if in fact Pittsburgh and Philadelphia turn out in any large numbers, it doesn't really matter at that point. Pennsylvania will, in fact, go to the Democratic ledger. What's your thought there?
Well, I would agree. I think there's another key demographic that helped Trump, obviously, in 2016, and that was white women. They have shifted since he's been in office. They certainly shifted in 2018. He's done nothing in the past 2 years to win them back. In fact, he's out on the stump begging them to still love him. White women love me, I need you. So I think he even knows that's where he's in trouble. We know what black women are going to do. We know what most black men are going to do, what some of our friends in the entertainment community are doing, notwithstanding. So that's a key group. And I think if that group holds, that will make it even more difficult for him in Pennsylvania and other states where it made a difference.
So, Mark, before I leave you, let me ask you, and I'll go to Lauren to follow up on that, but let's talk about the black male vote. There are a number of people who are suggesting, and poll numbers may be showing in some people's polls, that the black male may not indeed be solidly behind Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, and may either sit out or, as we saw, if Republican leaning by their wallets, they may cast a silent vote for Trump. How much do you believe that slant?
Well, I'm afraid to admit it's probably true. Now, I predict that black men are going to vote more, those who do vote more than 80% for Biden. I don't see Trump getting 20% of black men's vote. Maybe somewhere between 10, worst case scenario, 15. He got a little bit more than he should have in 2016. There's been a lot of confusion, 4 years of disinformation on social media targeting black men. So I think it's possible. It just shows how much more work we have to do as a community to prevent black men from being targeted in that way and prevent them from being so susceptible. And also calling out, if not punishing, those entertainers who are so eager to sell themselves out to support an agenda that is anti-African American.
Lauren, what do you think?
I think that, Mark makes some very good points. I think the fact that black men have not been prioritized by either of the parties is the reason why you see strange numbers like Donald Trump picking up, that level. I don't think he'll get 20%, but it doesn't surprise me because nobody really directly speaks to African-American men. And then, when they do, they throw up a barbershop commercial or some ad with hip hop music and think that that's somehow going to do it. I think that to one of Lenny's points, I do think you're right, Lenny, when you say that Georgia, we've been talking about Georgia and Texas for a while, but it never seems to happen. I actually think that this is the time it's going to happen. We're going to see Raphael Warnock get in there and beat Kelly Loeffler. We would see it happen a lot easier if Lieberman were to drop out. Why he's not doing that, I have absolutely no idea. But I do think that I think Biden is going to win Pennsylvania. We're going to find out in the first half of the night that Biden is going to win. We're not going to have to wait for Arizona and some of the states on the West Coast. And I think the way we find that out is through North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And we're just going to, I think we're going to have a fairly early night of finding out who the next president is. And Lenny, you're absolutely right. Those states that Trump barely won and should not have won because Hillary Clinton didn't feel like going to Wisconsin and all that, Biden is going to win all that. And so I do think there's a chance for him to have a huge victory in terms of the numbers. So we don't have, even though I think we are going to have games from this president, hopefully not the Supreme Court, but certainly the president is going to pretend that it was stolen. We're going to have all that nonsense. But I think it's going to be fairly clear by about 1 or 2 in the morning what's going on.
Before I get to Congress, Lenny, pick up on whatever you'd like to out of Lauren's points, but I also want to talk to you about something else that has been talked about as a long time coming, whether it's flipping Georgia and Texas. Another long time coming has been outreach to black folk by the Republican Party in a way that is entertained as real and genuine. We've been hearing about that for a long time, yet not really seeing it, particularly with Trump. You certainly took some steps back across the board. Where do you see that? And then pick up on whatever you'd like out of Lauren's thoughts.
Well, number one, I think that, and even the Reverend brought this up previously, there's something to be said about the entertainers speaking about engaging Trump. Now, engaging Trump and engaging the idea is not the same as saying they're going to vote for them. I don't think Ice Cube ever said he was definitely going to vote for Donald Trump. But there's something to be said about the whole African-American voting bloc being more nuanced in regards to saying, we're going to make both sides work for our vote, number one, and two, stay engaged with us moving forward so that we can guarantee that we get the policies that we need. Now, I will say that in many instances, the Trump administration has moved in the right direction with HBCUs, with school choice, with criminal justice reform. Now, can you separate that completely from some of the rhetoric that we have seen or some of the negative connotations and things that we have seen over the last 4 years? No, it's all together, but there have certainly been some intentional steps that the Trump administration has done over the course of the 4 years that we have not seen from Republican presidential candidates, Republican gubernatorial candidates, or even Republican congressional candidates over the last several decades. Back to what Lauren was saying, she's right in regards to Joe Biden's going to Michigan. Joe Biden is going to Wisconsin. With Kamala Harris on the ticket, there's going to be a different type of energy at the VP slot that Tim Kaine simply did not bring. At the same exact time, I think we have learned our lesson from 2016 to underestimate the hidden Trump voter. And when you take into consideration that we still have protests going on in Philadelphia right now, and Donald Trump is still trying to play that message of, look at this social unrest that we've had in Portland, that we had in Seattle, that we're having in Philadelphia again, and the like, if he continues to play the law and order narrative, something that worked for Nixon in '68, something that's worked for other candidates throughout the last 5 decades, that could be enough to get an extra 50,000 votes in the collar counties of Philadelphia, enough to get an extra 60,000 votes in North Carolina, where that Senate race was a blowout at one point in time, but with the allegations coming out about Cal Cunningham, it has now become a close race again with an incumbent Republican, Tom Tillis, and Cunningham. If that race goes towards the Republican, you'll probably see Trump win North Carolina. If that transpires and maybe Trump wins Pennsylvania in a razor-thin margin, it will be a long night, and you're going to hear a lot of heartburn from both sides moving through it.
Let me quickly take you all, as we are closing out here, to the Senate and the House. Mark, do you think we're going to see a flip in the Senate? It's not going to be an easy task at all, we should note.
It could be 50-50. I think at worst, a little more optimistic about that. It'll be 50-50, but if we can win both those seats in Georgia, then it'll be different and we'll have a lot more. I think it's really unfortunate that our friend Mike Espy is this close. He forced a runoff a couple of years ago. it's a shame that the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee didn't send more money down there. We're close to getting Mississippi and winning a state that has not been held by an African-American legislator since Reconstruction would be as historic as Barack Obama was as the first Black president. But we may fall a little short, but again, it'll be razor thin. We wish people on Twitter are calling for Lieberman to drop out even in Georgia to ensure Raphael Warnock's victory, because any small percentage he pulls away forces that runoff in that jumbled primary. But I think Warnock should still pull it out. So at least 50-50, Ed.
Lenny, what's your thought? I mean, not necessarily publicly, but privately, those of us who have kind of ear to the ground understand that there is some real concern on the Republican side about perhaps losing the Senate.
I mean, look, they at one point in time, North Carolina was all but gone. It's now in the fold again, but you're looking at possible Colorado, North Carolina. I would not be shocked if there's an upset in South Carolina. I think people are intrigued by the idea of having 2 African-American U.S. senators in South Carolina. Let's say that goes that way as well. I mean, Susan Collins up in Maine, she's going to have a hard time as well, because she can't find if she wants to be on the side of the Trump administration or not. And I think people are tired of people flip-flopping in the Senate when it comes to that issue as well. I think there's enough votes to turn the Senate. Now, if they don't, there's going to be one Republican barely hanging on, where it's a 51-49. But I do expect to see a couple of seats flip on election night.
Lauren, finally, let me ask you, what do you think Democrats have to look out for on election night, beyond obviously just a big turnout? Beyond that, what would you say?
Fraud and chaos, and mayhem, and the president declaring himself the winner when he lost. I think there's going to probably be some game played by the president and his, so-called attorney general there, who is really his private attorney. But the president knows he's losing, which is why he was in Nebraska yesterday, which is extremely strange. And the Republican Party knows it's about to lose the Senate, probably 52-48. And that is going to be make for a very dramatic night. And I just think that the president is going to try to talk everybody into some sort of nonsense, quite frankly.
Lenny, Lauren, Mark, thank you so much. Always intriguing to talk to you, and we are just a few days away. We shall see.
I definitely intend to vote voting Monday, early voting. The first election is really, keeping our ideals of America that we're still trying to live up to. And where we're going right now, I don't see that happening.
Definitely, we need a change. Our president right now is not for us, not for Black women, not for Black people, period. So that is mostly, why I definitely want to see a change in our presidential office.
Most agree that it will be voter turnout that decides the ultimate winner. History shows a higher turnout bodes well for Democrats. Joining us now is Oscar Joyner, managing partner of Liquid Soul Media. They've supported the Vote HBCU campaign. Also with us, Desmond Meade, author of Let My People Vote. He is a voting rights activist and executive director for the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Oscar, let me start with you. Give me a sense of how you connected with HBCU Vote and why it's important to make sure that young people, we hear about them during election season so much, get out there.
Yeah, you hear about them every election season, and the difference between this one is there's honestly been an enthusiasm gap that we haven't seen for quite a while. There's always been some candidate since the early 2000s that has somehow, or the 90s, I should say, that has somehow resonated with the Black community, but this time there hasn't. So enthusiasm gap had to be filled. So Liquid Soul, a full service marketing agency out of Atlanta, Georgia, and my office, Liquid Soul Politico in Dallas, Texas, have engaged with the Collective PAC and Vote HBCU, a campaign that engaged a number of HBCUs up and down the East Coast, particularly in swing states. We've also worked with Sigma Gamma Rho sorority. This weekend, they've got almost 100 sorors on October 30th, doing an all-important phone banking for get out the vote activities. We've also done a very fantastic campaign managing defeat by tweet. We've turned Trump's tweets against him. 36,000 donors have donated between 1 cent and 10 cents for a micro donation, which accounts to about $2,300 per tweet. That's $3.7 million that has gone to a collection of Black-led organizations working to defeat Trump in 9 key swing states. So every time he tweets, a donation goes to groups like the Dream Defenders, the Collective, the Black Church PAC. Also doing the most important thing, Ed, you can appreciate is buying Black media. Liquid Soul Politico has been buying Black radio, Radio 1, iHeart, Spotify. Biden and others have stood by what they've said to a degree, and it's spent on Black media, and that is helping a lot. It's made a big difference, we hope.
Desmond, let me turn to you and let me say to you, brother, the one thing that I am most encouraged by you, Desmond, is I have seen on a number of occasions some interviews with you and your impassioned push to get people involved. And it is a personal journey for you, Desmond. Talk to us about where you've come from and why this is so important to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I came from the bottom, man. At the end of the day, 2005, standing in front of railroad tracks, a convicted felon, a crackhead, homeless, recently released from prison, and I didn't have any hope. And I was waiting on the train to come so I can jump in front of it. But God had other plans, and that train never came, and I crossed those tracks, and I was able to check myself into drug treatment, and after completing that, move into a homeless shelter. And it was while I was there that I wanted to do something to improve the likelihood of me not using drugs again and to be an asset to my community. And so I enrolled in college, man, and did very well there to eventually me getting accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated with a law degree. And in that process, I was able to become a part of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition and officially incorporated in 2011. And the rest is history, man. We led the Amendment 4 effort that re-enfranchised 1.4 million people with felony convictions. And we have transformed the political landscape. And we are most definitely having an impact in the direction this country will be headed.
The idea, Desmond, that most people miss the idea of felons not being able to vote. You kind of hear it and it kind of goes by your ears. But the reality is when you see the brothers and sisters who, in particular, have had felony charges, levied against them, and as we start to see how often those charges were railroaded, it really does change the voting dynamic, does it not?
Of course it does, and you could just look at the plain numbers, like, for instance, we live in a state right now where presidential elections are decided by as little as 537 votes, and you talk about 1.4 million people now having some type of pathway to be able to participate in our democracy. What we're seeing is something far greater than even partisan politics. We're seeing a new constituency group being developed that actually covers the gap, and not just in presidential elections, but in state attorney or DA races, in judicial races, in sheriff races as well. And so we really do have the ability to change the conditions that we have been seeing in our communities for quite a number of years. And it didn't just start with Breonna Taylor. It didn't just start with George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery. And we know all too well the feeling of over-aggressive policing practices and takedown procedures and all of that. And so here we are poised in 2020, which is the most pivotal election year this country has ever seen, and we are actually going to be the voice that's going to bring about the change.
Yeah, and in fact, we should note it didn't start with Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin or any of the folks that had become, martyrs to a great degree for a generation. Oscar, give me a sense of how we continue this kind of passion beyond Election Day. I push all the time to tell people Election Day should not be your last day of participation, particularly if your candidate wins. It really should be your first day of participation at that point. What are you looking to do?
Well, there's the good and the bad of it is, honestly, the momentum is going to continue because there is going to be another Trayvon Martin, another Arbery, there's going to be another incident. That movement and hashtag has turned into something that we hope can be tangible on Tuesday. You're right. What used to be a march and a protest in the 60s and a movement turned into an outcry particularly in the last year. We hope that can change. And again, when the next incident comes, Ben Crump will still be on the forefront. Reverend Al will still be on the forefront. The Dream Defenders will still be on the forefront. These organizations will still be out there pushing for change. And hopefully with the organizations now pushing for all of this focus down the ballot, they can see that while the presidential election is important, it's the district attorney, it's the circuit court judges, it's those people that will help your brother or sister stand trial against an incident that may happen to them, not the president of the United States. So if you're upset about the DA in Kentucky not convicting Breonna Taylor's officers, then you need to vote for the district attorney. So when that happens in your town, like I'm in Dallas, Texas, and it did happen to a young man, Botham Jean, sitting in his living room eating ice cream, I need to vote so I can sit on a jury. I need to vote so I can vote for the judge. I need to vote so I can vote for the president too. But hopefully these incidents will keep fueling the fire of this movement that I'm happy to say has turned from a hashtag into a protest.
Desmond, let me close out with you. You've been on the ground in Florida and elsewhere. What are you feeling? Are you feeling good about what we will see on Tuesday? Do you think we're going to see a groundswell?
And listen, I am feeling great. You know, at the end of the day, I think the biggest winners, particularly in Florida and states like Louisiana, North Carolina, the biggest winners, man, are people who were previously shut out of this process and now have an opportunity to have their voices heard. You know, just a few weeks ago, I ran across a young lady who was given 6 months to live. And her dying wish was not to go to Disney World or an exotic place or to meet a celebrity. Her dying wish was to be able to see what it felt like to be an American citizen, what it felt like to vote. Something that I experienced for my first time over the weekend in voting in my very first presidential election, right? And it's a sense of knowing that I exist and that my voice counts, that my vote matters. And there's thousands upon thousands of returning citizens throughout the state of Florida and throughout this country that is looking forward to this moment. And no matter what happens on election night, the one thing that we know for sure is that the voices of returning citizens will have an impact, right? And to me, that's the greatest thing that can happen. I think we all ought to be celebrating, right? In recovery, in AA and NA, they say the most important person in the room is the newcomer, that person that's just achieving sobriety. And I believe in our democracy, the most important person in our democracy are those people who are voting for the first time, people who've been shut out the process, but now have an opportunity to have their voices heard. And then we ought to be partying across this country. And I know definitely we're partying across the state of Florida.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both, not only for being on the show, but being out there on the grounds and making people believe their voices will be heard. Appreciate you both.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Election season is also about numbers and prognostication. As we saw in 2016, pollsters don't always get it right, but watching trends and counting numbers is what America likes to do during election time. Joining us now is Henry Fernandez of the African American Research Collaboration. Henry, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Oh, absolutely. Wonderful to be here with you.
Busy season for you guys. Give me a sense of what we see as we move really just days away now that you want people to pay attention to, some trending, some numbers that are maybe tipping or tilting with what people thought up front.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually seeing many more pathways now that Joe Biden could win this. And that's not what we necessarily expected at first, but we're seeing states like North Carolina and Georgia. Certainly Florida is always competitive, but particularly so this year. His primary pathway is certainly still through the Midwest. Pennsylvania is really what we call the tipping point state. If he wins Pennsylvania, he's almost certainly going to win the whole thing. But we have some states now that are really interesting. Arizona is another one. When we think particularly about states that have large numbers of African Americans, Pennsylvania is important, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, but Black voters will be instrumental to the outcome on Election Day, no question about it.
Henry, we talked about this during our panel segment. I'm curious how you see and what you have been looking at by means of numbers in terms of the silent Trump vote that really emerged in 2016 and became a muscle and his pathway to a great degree, and the concern of apathy amongst voters, which really raises its ugly head every election, but the idea that maybe Biden has not ignited all of the Democratic Party or independent voters as people would want.
Well, I think actually we're seeing enormous turnout, certainly in early voting. We've never seen early voting at this level in the history of the country. So, and obviously that's driven by COVID and people's concerns about COVID, but also a real desire for change. So we're seeing a lot of people who are voting early in person, but also a lot of people who are voting by mail. And a lot of that vote by mail, it looks like it's a vote for Biden. It is true that Trump creates more energy. And so there's a lot of people who are coming out to vote for Trump. It looks like there's even more people who are coming out to vote against Trump. So he creates energy on both sides, and particularly among African Americans. Trump is remarkably unpopular among African Americans. We're going to see numbers in terms of both turnout and vote choice, that people are actually choosing Biden over Trump, that we certainly didn't see 4 years ago. We didn't see this level of opposition. We didn't see that to Trump. We didn't see this level of support that we're now seeing for Biden with regard to Hillary Clinton. So this is a very different election. I don't think we're going to have a lot of shy voters. People know what this race is about, whatever side they're choosing.
Here's the unknown that you brought up that's interesting. We are going to see a record number of early voting. We've already surpassed the 70 million mark. That being said, there will be those who may believe that, well, that bodes well for the Democratic Party. Biden's got this thing in the bag, and they decide not to go get in a line they may not want to stand in on Election Day. Is that something that Democrats have to be wary of?
I think so. I think the Democrats always have to be wary of not doing enough outreach. That's especially true this year because the Democrats' strength, both the Democrats and grassroots organizations that support progressive candidates, their strength is in the ability to go door to door, to have those personal conversations. And the conservatives, the Republicans, because of their views that maybe COVID wasn't as dangerous, they did more door-to-door knocking this year than the Democrats did or than progressive organizations did. And so we're now seeing Democratic groups getting out, knocking on doors, lots of people making phone calls. But that energy that the Democrats usually bring in the last month of the election of really pushing people out to the polls, we didn't see that as much, both in the last month, but really in the preceding months of July and August and September. And so I do think that there's always that risk. But I also think people understand what's at stake. We're certainly seeing that in the poll numbers that most African Americans believe this is the most important election of their lifetime.
We're going to see redistricting coming up in 2021 as we look toward making sure that you vote states and down ballot issues. How important do you see that in terms of the knowledge of voters understanding that that is what is going to occur?
This is a really good question, an excellent point, Ed. So the point you're making here is that state legislatures determine the districts, how district lines will be drawn for Congress, also for state legislators in every state in the country, with a couple of exceptions where there are independent bodies that do that. But the large majority, it's by state legislatures. And so it really, if we want to look at significant change on the issues that matter to African Americans, and the top issues in our polling are certainly COVID, racial justice, police reform, and the cost of healthcare, that if you want changes there, that means that we need also changes in Congress, not just this election, but going forward, and how the district lines are drawn is essential to who gets elected. And what's important to note is that 10 years ago, when those lines were drawn by state legislatures, those state legislatures were majority Republican across the country. And so they drew lines so that in a state like North Carolina, for instance, Democrats would regularly now win the large majority of votes, or a significant majority of votes statewide in races for governor, for instance. But Republicans, because of how the lines are drawn, win the majority of state legislative seats. In fact, until the most recent election, won a supermajority in North Carolina. This happens throughout many states. And so all voters, African-American voters in particular, should be sure to vote their entire ballot. Vote all the positions on the ballot. Educate yourself. Don't just stop at president. Go all the way down. So if you're going to vote for Biden and Harris, do that, and just keep voting down the rest of the ballot. And you'll find in almost all states you can get good information about the positions of the candidates up and down the ballot.
Well, Henry, you and I want to thank you for being a part of the show today, but you and I will have a long night on election night as we'll be part of the NAACP's special election night coverage, so I look forward to that. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Happy to come back anytime.
In a few short days, all the numbers will be in. Will Donald Trump win a second term, or will former Vice President Joe Biden win the Oval? The COVID pandemic changed the traditional stumping that candidates do to press the flesh in attempts to win votes. The bitter partisan nature of politics has left very few in the pool of undecideds to go after. Trump has changed how the world looks at America's commander-in-chief, and not for the better. Joe Biden has not exactly lit a fire of excitement among many Democrats. That being said, the choice for most is easy. Trumpers see a man who is unconventional and not afraid to keep America the way she's been for decades. In their minds, he's protecting the values of the good old USA. Biden supporters see a man of decency who is the hope to bring back a sense of civility to America. But it's no longer up to either man to convince the vast majority of voters who to choose. No, it's now time for America to tell the world who we are. Are we willing to give a second term to a man who at every turn has broken rules, left truth behind, and been more concerned about the stock market and his ego than slowing a pandemic? A man who claims to be the least racist person anyone could meet, yet he is unwilling to condemn white supremacy. Joe Biden isn't a perfect candidate. Some would even call him flawed. But Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. Biden is not a man who thinks of himself as bigger than the office and whose ego won't allow him to live in a world dictated by his own hubris. The difference between the two is clear, and so is the choice. The winner of this election will say less about the man and more about this country. For those of you who haven't voted, don't let this chapter be written without you. Make sure to vote. Yesterday, people died to give you the right to go to the polls. And today, others could very well die because you didn't. The choices are simply that serious. I'm Ed Gordon. Thanks for joining.